Bem, bom dia a todos. Vamos dar início à nossa palestra. Eu vejo aqui várias pessoas presentes. Eu vou fazer um teste com o microfone e perguntar se ouvem bem a partir disto aqui. Ouvem bem?
Perfeito, Saulo.
O closed caption, por enquanto, vai ficar mostrando alguma coisa estranha, porque ele está programado para inglês. Então, não prestem atenção no que ele capta como português. Mas ele me deu agora a opção de... Eu não vou nem alterar isso aqui, não, para não complicar. Daqui a pouco, a professora Taygeti Michalakea começará a sua exposição e nós ficamos muito honrados com a presença de todos vocês hoje aqui para esta palestra. A professora Taygeti é atualmente lector da European Law and Governance School, que é uma universidade mantida por uma organização internacional sediada em Atenas, a European Public Law Organization, que reúne algumas dezenas de países na Europa, praticamente todos, e tem acordos de cooperação com instituições fora da Europa. E o Brasil é um dos países onde a EPLO pretende crescer a cooperação, e ela desenvolveu acordos de cooperação com a Universidade Federal da Bahia, conosco, assinamos em setembro do ano passado, assinou com a USP e assinou com o Instituto de Direito Público em Brasília. Então, nós somos as 3 instituições que estão atuando junto com a PLO. Estamos recebendo aqui a professora Taygeti, que ela tem vinculação com a Universidade de Ciências Sociais e Políticas de Atenas, como eu disse, com a ELGS, e vai falar hoje sobre direitos humanos e empresas nas perspectivas global e brasileira. Nós temos hoje no Brasil a perspectiva de aprovação do PL 572. Esse PL cuida do Marco Nacional sobre Direitos Humanos e Empresas e cuida esse marco de aplicar as normas nacionais e internacionais de promoção de políticas públicas sobre o tema, respeitando os tratados internacionais sobre o tema e as normas brasileiras. E muitas mudanças estão relacionadas com este PL. Nós temos a previsão de responsabilidade solidária em toda a cadeia de produção, previsão de sobreposição de direitos humanos sobre quaisquer contratos, acordos celebrados entre empresas e governos, sanções que vão da interdição, suspensão de atividades, proibição de incentivos, multa com fisco. Temos no Brasil dezenas de casos onde estamos verificando a necessidade de um tratamento legislativo diferenciado para a matéria. Temos o caso da Salgema em Maceió, de Mariana, das manchas de petróleo em Praias do Nordeste, da chuva de prata de Sepetiba. E para falar sobre a perspectiva de regulamentação no Brasil, do que ocorreu na Europa e do que existe hoje já em nível internacional, temos a professora Taygeti, a quem eu tenho a honra de dar a palavra agora. Este evento é organizado pelo Programa de Pós-Graduação em Direito da Universidade Federal da Bahia e tem o apoio do Consulado Honorário da Grécia na Bahia. Aqui se faz presente em nossa sala a cônsul honorária Miriam Souza, apoiando esse evento. E ficamos muito contentes com a participação de todos vocês. Então, eu vou passar a palavra agora à professora Taygeti Michalakea.
You can hear me well, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Casali. Thank you for having me here. Thank you to the online participants and, most importantly, to the people who are here. My name is Taygeti Michalakea, and as Professor Casali said, I'm a researcher in Greece in Pantheon University on topics of business and human rights, and I recently started a big program with some other European universities on technology and human rights, and at the same time, I'm a lecturer at the European Law and Governance School. If you can.
In the as low as possible.
Okay.
Because they
Yes.
Yeah.
In the European Law and Governance School, which is a newly established university. It is established within an international organization. And we have two premises in Athens. One of them is the one that you can see in the picture on the left. It's a very beautiful building in the center of Athens, and another one next to the sea. And we are very focused in European studies. We have different undergraduate and postgraduate programs on law and governance and political science with a view to the European Union. And we also have a department in Italy and another department in Cascais, in Portugal, which is the newest one. And I think it might be interesting for you, the fact that we have a master on global rule of law and democracy. There, it will start, I think, somewhere in September. And we also have various different summer schools. Of course, what is summer for us is different for you, but they are all held in June, July, and August. Can you pass on the next one? So,
yes.
This is our building Cascais in Portugal. So I came here today because I researched the issue of business and human rights, and the idea is to discuss a bit this field with you. It is a new field, both in terms of law and in terms of practice. It's like 10 to 15 years that it has been established, and there are many, many developments in terms of laws, both in the level of the EU, but also individually by different states, by Germany, France, the US, UK. They all have different laws, and we will see also at the end that Brazil has been moving in this direction. Now, why do I say that this field is a new field? Is it because it's only recent? No. It is because it goes a bit counter, it goes against what we have learned about human rights so far. And let me start from some very basic concepts in order to show why it is new. The traditional perspectives that we have learned and we are being taught on human rights say that human rights are entitlements that we have, entitlements of freedom that we have towards our states. So the state is obliged to provide us some rights, the right to work, the right to vote, the right to free speech, also social rights. So it's a space of freedom that we have towards the state. Should I do that?
Yes.
Okay. So there are many international conventions protecting our diverse human rights. There are the covenants on civil and political rights, the one on economic, social, and cultural rights, of course, the 1948 Universal Declaration, and then there are more specific conventions that have almost virtually global ratification by states, the Convention Against Torture, the one on women, children, the Convention Against Discrimination, but also conventions against violations of rights of people with disabilities. Apart from those very important instruments, some other instruments that are important for the issue of business and human rights are some ILO conventions.
Yes.
The ILO is the International Labour Organization, which is responsible for securing some minimum level of good working conditions for us. Freedom from child labor and slave labor are very, very basic, are considered very, very basic, but also there are safeguards by the ILO on non-discrimination at work, good working conditions, non-excessive working hours, and these are very, very important in the context of business and human rights. And the other international framework that is important on business and human rights is the framework, the protections that we have on indigenous people. Of course, there is no convention. There are mostly soft law documents.
Yes.
There are soft law documents, and there are some very important provisions protecting the rights of indigenous people. Not very effectively, but still it is something. And a very important provision is the provision on free, prior, and informed consent, which means that when there is a mega project, or when the state wants to do a mega project in a land that indigenous people live, it should take the free, prior, informed consent of the people living there. Now, apart from the international documents, we of course have regional documents, like in Europe we have the European Convention on Human Rights. Again, in the African continent we have the African Charter on Humans and People Rights, and in Latin America you have the Inter-American Convention and the accompanying courts. The Inter-American Court is a very progressive and successful court in terms of jurisprudence, and also the European Court. The African, not so much. They have some very important decisions, but it's not so prolific. And needless to mention that we have human rights protections in virtually every country enshrined in the constitutions, both in Greece, but also in Brazil. So the idea is that when we have a right that is violated, we go usually, since the state is the one that guarantees it, we go against the state, either to the Supreme Court or Constitutional Court, depending on what each state has. And then we have the regional level, and of course we have the international level. But the international level usually does not afford tangible remedies. I know that in Brazil you have the horizontal effect of human rights, so you use human rights provisions also against other individuals, but in most of the countries of the world, what you can use against individuals is usually civil law. So human rights is something that is protected against the state. Can we? Yes, go on. Next slide. Yes. So the essence here, what I want to say is that in the human rights literature and discourse, for every right that we have, it is the state that has some obligations. These are very basic things. I'm sure you already know them. The state has an obligation to respect our rights, not to violate them, to adopt the specific laws and policies, and to provide remedies in case violations happen. So here we see a centrality of the state in the human rights discourse. It is the state that has the obligation. It is the states that have ratified all the treaties. It is the state that enacts the constitution and undertakes some responsibilities. So actually what is missing from this picture, from this equation, there is no reference to corporations. Can we pass it on? More, sorry, I didn't. And this is normal because the whole human rights discourse, if we go back in the Magna Carta times in the UK, human rights were something that were invented to protect people against the king, against the ruler. So it's a protection against those who have the authority, which in modern times, those who have the authority are considered to be the states. The states have the monopoly of power. So corporations are absent from any human rights treaty, internationally and domestically. Corporations and human rights do not go together. You might see them in commercial law, in competition law, in civil law. In some few places of the world, you can see them in criminal law as well, but not in comparison to human rights law, which brings me to my next question. Is that a big issue? Do they need to have human rights obligations? Why is there all this fuss during the last 15 years? And of course, my response to that as a researcher of business and human rights is that, of course, they should have human rights obligations. And there are several reasons for that. There are reasons of context, more general reasons, but also legal reasons on why we should start looking at this new field more and more seriously. Now, the first reason is that if you see in the past, states were much more powerful than corporations. But now this dynamic is starting to change, especially after the end of the Cold War, with all these trade liberalization measures, with the deregulation of the market, with the thousands of investment treaties that have been signed. We have businesses that became more and more expansive, mega actors, super actors, expanding across different places of the world, one multinational business. And my lecture is more focused on multinational businesses. Of course, human rights should be respected by a small corner supermarket that is a small and medium enterprise. But the businesses that pose the biggest problems are the transnational, multinational businesses. And this is because their structure is so complicated and so expansive that they are actually becoming what I call super actors, expanding across many different states. Can we pass on to the next? Like this is a very simplistic supply chain of a company, of a big company nowadays. They procure their goods from places that are rich in resources, usually in the global south, and then they assemble them in a different country, and then logistics are in yet another country, and they promote them in the market in other countries. So it is very, very complicated. And the next slide is, again, a very simplistic supply chain of Starbucks. Starbucks is procuring coffee, of course, from Latin America, but also from places in Africa and Indonesia, the plantations, and then they are processed in factories, usually in the US, and then going back and being diffused in the market. And these superstructures have created corporations that have huge economic power. If you see a classification of powerful economic actors, there are few states. The more important, the most powerful are corporations. Can we go to the next one? And many times corporations have a market cap, like a profit, that is much higher than the GDP of countries. GDP is the gross domestic product. And here you can see the market cap of Facebook, which is above the market cap of many important countries, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Switzerland, the Netherlands, luckily not Brazil. But you can see that if you are an economic actor with so much economic power, I believe that human rights is something that you should care about. And the next slide is about different companies. Microsoft has a market cap higher than 8 Eastern European countries. Apple has a market cap higher than the half of the GDP of Russia. And the story goes like that. We have very important and strong companies in terms of economics, but the economy doesn't go alone. It comes with political power as well. If you consider that in Brussels, where are the seat of the European Parliament, the European Commission, imagine that there are around 7,000 lobbying companies lobbying with European deputies to vote for the laws that accommodate their interests. So what I wanted to say is that the size and the structure of the corporation is something that we should care about. And then there is also the activities that companies undertake. Can we go to the next one? Of course, they provide services and they provide our phones and our computers, but they're acquiring functions that are closer and closer to the functions of the state. There are many places, I don't know in Brazil, where electricity or water are provided by private companies. And more and more recently, they are even acquiring very core functions like the police. We have private security, military. The US military, half of the US military is private contractors. Prisons, and they told me, I'm not sure, that you have privately run prisons in Brazil. I don't know if it's true. So we see that the activities that they undertake go closer and closer to the state. So we have the size of the corporations, their structure, their activities, and we go. Of course, we have some positive effects. And size, structure, and activity is not enough to advocate for a new framework. But if you see at the violations that they are able, the harm that they are able to induce, I think will be convicted. Now, don't get me wrong. Of course, mega corporations offer good services, good products. With the technology that they offer us, our life is more and more easy. They create jobs. They are fundamental in the modern way of living. But I will not refer anymore to their positive effects, because what I care about is their negative effect. And I have put quite a lot of cases of negative effects, and they are not the only. In our everyday life, if you are an employee of a corporation, it's very easy that your labor rights are violated. But I wanted a bit to let you know about the big cases, the seminal cases in the field. Can we go? And one of the very first cases was a tragedy that happened in Bhopal, India. It was a Union Carbide corporation. It's an American corporation that was producing pesticides and insecticides. So there was a gas leak in 1984, and it was around 20,000 people who died because it contaminated the whole region from the gas leak, and thousands of people that had health problems. Of course, the environment was also contaminated. The really sad thing is that Union Carbide tried to avoid any sanction. So it was only in 2010, almost 30 years after, that some Indian officials were convicted by Indian courts, and compensation has still not been given. And then another case, which is much more recent and shook a bit, at least the Europeans, is the collapse of a factory in Bangladesh in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And they were shocked because in this factory, a lot of clothes that are sold in the European market by Zara, by Corte Inglés, by Benetton, by very famous fashion brands, were constructed there. But the companies didn't care about the health and safety, and the building did not have any health and safety provisions. And again, it was it was more than 1,000 people who died, and there is now litigation in Germany against German retailers, but it is very, very difficult to actually prove the link of a company that sells clothes in Germany with what happened in Bangladesh. There are cases and campaigns against Samsung, which I believe you all have at least one Samsung device. And they advocate about how well their working conditions are. But evidence from Korea, from the factory in Korea, shows otherwise. There are workers who have committed suicide because they work excessive long working hours with no health and safety. And this is why it says no more death in Samsung. And there is a Korean protesting because they had a wave of suicides by workers. Another really worrying issue, and I also feel very bad because our phones and our computers need cobalt. It is a material that they need to be produced. And the country that produces 70% of cobalt worldwide is the Congo. In the Congo, apart from the fact that the northern provinces are in war, in constant conflict, the rule of law is also very weak, and child labor is not really protected. So they are using extensively young children to extract cobalt. And this is why there are also some phones that have been produced, which are called fair trade phones, but they are not really easily sold in the market because they are extremely expensive. Next one. We also have, there is a very serious case in the Niger Delta. Shell company, an oil company, went to the Niger Delta, they extracted oil, and they had some protests by local indigenous communities. And some of the protesters were executed they went into court because they were protesting, and they were executed. And Shell not only did not do anything about it, but was kind of, let's say, satisfied that they didn't have to deal with the indigenous people anymore. And there are many, many cases in the US. Unfortunately, one of them ended in a settlement. The other one was dismissed. There are cases in the Netherlands, cases in the UK. So victims are really trying to go outside Nigeria because, as you understand, the mother company is not seated in Nigeria. It's seated in foreign countries, and they have to waste a great amount of money and resources and to find lawyers to go abroad to claim compensation for both environmental contamination, the destruction of indigenous way of living, but also the death of the protesters. Much more recent, 2022, the World Cup in Qatar, Vinci, a very well-known French company, I think it's French, they were using foreign laborers in Qatar in very bad working conditions. Some of them died, but there were no labor regulations that were respected. Next one. Another case that is a real tragedy is Texaco, which is nowadays Chevron in Ecuador. It's active in Ecuador since 1964. They were extracting a very large amount of gallons of oil and natural gas per day, and they were contaminating the river. And again, the victims faced huge difficulties when they tried to access justice. They went to the US to file a case there. The US court said, no, you should go to Ecuador. They went to Ecuador. They managed to get a judgment in their favor, but they cannot enforce it. So they have like a judgment which says you are owed 15 million, but there is nowhere. They came also to Brazil to enforce it, but I don't remember exactly. There was a problem and they couldn't enforce it. They went to Canada, and also Texaco Chevron did a huge campaign against the victim. They sued the lawyers for corruption. They sued the activists. They sued the environmental engineers who said that the water is polluted. They did a huge campaign, and also they took the state of Ecuador to international arbitration, and they said that the state is at fault because its courts convicted Texaco. So you understand that even if you manage to have a court case, it's very difficult actually to acquire compensation. Next one, and next one. And businesses are not only involved in mega violations, but also in small violations in everyday life. They're also involved in wars and authoritarian regimes. And this was my topic of the topic of my PhD, and I really love it. Because if you see how many businesses are actually involved and are financing and are fueling conflicts, you will understand also many things about why some conflicts keep on emerging, like in Sudan, in the Congo. Also, the current conflict in Israel and Palestine, there are many, many companies who are gaining profit out of it. And this is not a new story. After the World War II, where we had some trials to try the Nazi leaders, there were also trials of businessmen. For example, the businessman who sold the gas that was used in the extermination camp. They convicted them, but they did nothing with their companies. So you can convict an individual, which is an executive of the company, but it's very difficult to do something against the company. Next one. And I don't know if you have seen a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, The Blood Diamonds. It depicts a bit the situation with minerals coming, especially diamonds coming from African countries, and how actually warlords are giving diamonds in order to buy weapons. And this leads to a continuation and different conflicts emerging. Next one. In Colombia, I spent some time doing research in Colombia, and it's also there, Chiquita, which is, at least in Greece, we only have Chiquita bananas. I don't know if you have them here in Greece. They're okay, it's a very big business in Europe. And they were hiring paramilitaries in Colombia to secure their land. So to kick out people and create more and more conflict in order that they have land for their plantation. And also Drummond, which is a coal company, was involved. And there are cases in the US and in Colombia. And BP also was involved in torturing trade unions. And there are many cases during the Argentinian dictatorship with Ford and Mercedes giving their premises for the torture of trade unionists. I think there are some in Brazil. There were some, but I'm not really sure. Next one. There are cases being filed against BNP Paribas, which is a famous French bank, because it facilitated loans to be given that were used during the Rwandan genocide in 1994. There are cases that are not really successful for the Liberian conflict. Only one guy next. And next. This guy is one of the very few who have been convicted. He was getting timber from Liberia in exchange for giving arms to the president of the Liberia during the internal conflict. They have both an internal conflict and a conflict with Sierra Leone. There are also Lafarge, which is a cement company who was paying ISIS very recently in Syria in order to secure their factory. So cases, there is a wealth of cases, both of businesses committing violations and of businesses actually being involved in war or repression. Next one. At the same time, we see states that are making their laws more and more lax, because the idea is that we need to attract investment. We are in a constant financial crisis. I don't know how much the financial crisis influenced Brazil, but in Greece, it was a huge thing, and also in the US. So in many countries, the idea is let's make our laws and our labor laws and our tax laws more relaxed so that businesses come here. And let's treat them in a soft way, let's say. But I don't think that there is any economic development that you can achieve if there is no respect of the law. Next one. And the last, I think, point of context is that the victims are very much without power. If you are a victim, an indigenous community against a mega corporation, you understand that the money that you have, the lawyers that you can access, are much less than the ones of the companies. The companies have a lot of money. For example, Texaco in Ecuador filed like 10 different lawsuits in the US against environmental engineers. Indigenous victims do not have that access. And most of all, they receive a lot of, the new trend is that when you're a journalist or an activist complaining about something, big companies file what we call SLAP. SLAP is the acronym for Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation, which are defamation lawsuits of $1 million, let's say. And the idea is that with these lawsuits, they make the journalists and the activists freeze. They have a chilling effect. If you are a journalist without money and you receive $1 million lawsuit, of course, you will never refer to this issue again. But even worse than that, there are reprisals, there are threats, there are even killings of people who try to go against it. Unfortunately, Latin America, but also the Philippines, go first in the attacks against human rights defenders, against people who try to protect human rights against businesses. And the main violations are being, we can see them in the field of mining, of course, renewables, but also agribusiness. Next one. And now the legal question. We have all these issues of context. We have corporate actors who are becoming bigger and bigger. And at the same time, next to them, the law is becoming more and more inadequate to tackle the issue. And this is because, next one.
Just a minute
Yes.
to solve the closed caption, change it to Portuguese. I don't know why. I put him back to English. Just a minute.
Yes. And the main problem is that when you try to sue a company, especially when you try to sue the mother company, the parent company, which is usually located in the global north, it is very difficult to prove the link between the parent and the subsidiary because we have this concept of separate legal personality. So companies are kind of insured, the shareholders, but also the different companies that are in a consortium, they are insured from liability. So it's very difficult for victims to reach the one company that has most assets. And then if you look at the different fields of law, next one. Next. If you look at different fields of law, you will see that each of them is inadequate. The international law framework does not cover businesses. Public international law is something between states and international organizations. Human rights law, international treaties deal only with the right of the person towards the state. And human rights is something guaranteed by the state, as I said in the beginning. Then we have international criminal law that has to do more with conflict, war crimes, genocide. Again, it's only individuals that will go to court. It is not, it is warlords. It is not a company. Although, when they were discussing the statute of the International Criminal Court in Rome, there were some people that said we should include company liability. Companies are many years involved in wars. We should take them to the International Criminal Court. But as you understand, this proposal was not met with success by the most powerful countries, so it is only individuals that can go to it. And then in domestic law, if you try to take companies to the civil court, there are many problems with what I said, parent company liability. How do you prove it? Also in civil courts, you need a big amount of money. At least in Greece, whenever you file a civil lawsuit, you have to pay a lot. You have to pay your lawyer. You have to gather the evidence, which is very difficult. And most of the cases have not been successful, especially if they are filed to a foreign jurisdiction. And with criminal law, although in the last 5 to 10 years, we have more and more countries changing their idea of criminal law and adapting it to corporations, in most of the countries, we don't have corporate criminal liability. We don't have in Greece, and I think you don't have in Brazil. You have it only for environmental crimes and corruption. So for other issues, there is no corporate criminal liability. So we're kind of in a dead end. Big actors, empowered victims, states that want more and more businesses, and the law who is not able to face it. Next one. Next. And what I wanted to point here is that the huge impact that corporations can have means that the problem, the violations of corporations, cannot be tackled only by civil law or by criminal law. They are not small civil law infractions between individuals. They are something bigger. They are an issue, I think, of the global human rights community. They are an actor that should enter the business and human rights discourse. Next one, but no. Next. And here is a timeline of the efforts which are not really successful that have been carried out at a global level. So the story says that it was Allende who gave a speech in the UN General Assembly in 1972, and he said that, look, he said to the rest of the states, in my overthrow, there were companies, there were American companies that were involved, and company called International Telecom. And then after this speech, the UN decided to create a committee of experts in 1974 to discuss the issue of national. I think there is a case against Facebook. Facebook is giving the outsourcing of checking the content to a company called Teleperformance, and they were quite restrictive in the freedom of speech. So they were cutting down content, actually. So, yeah, there are not international laws, there are domestic laws, but they are not always in our favor, in the favor of human rights.
Yes. Some other question? Alguma outra pergunta aqui? Então, quero encerrar o evento agradecendo a presença da cônsul honorária da Grécia, na Bahia, a professora Miriam Souza, também advogada da área jurídica, portanto, e agradecer a presença de todos vocês aqui, presencialmente, agradecer a presença na sala virtual, pedir já a todos na sala virtual que postassem o nome, CPF e e-mail para envio de certificado, e vou reiterar isso aqui. Nós temos uma lista ali, nome, e-mail e CPF para envio de certificados. E encerramos, então, essa palestra com a alegria de termos recebido aqui em Salvador, na Universidade Federal da Bahia, a professora Taygeti Michalakea, que é grega e que é visitante no IDP. Quem chegou depois, a European Public Law Organization, tem intercâmbio com 3 instituições brasileiras, a USP, o IDP em Brasília e nós aqui na UFBA. Temos um protocolo assinado ano passado e este intercâmbio de alunos, de professores, começa a ocorrer. Agora mesmo o IDP levou um grupo de alunos a Atenas e nós vamos provavelmente fazer isso também no futuro. Estamos hoje recebendo a professora Taygeti. A quem agradecemos, professora, toda essa contribuição hoje a nós aqui na área acadêmica. Então, obrigado a todos. Encerrada, então, esta conferência. Obrigado.
Thank you.